What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come. What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, the thing I love about doing this show is I get to talk to all these interesting people. Hope everybody checked out Sam Patton from last week. He had a fascinating story. So I found Jesse Crossen on TikTok, of all places. And I just, one after another. Jesse has 1.1 million followers on TikTok. He has 35 million likes. And I was just telling him the thing that he does that I think is so powerful is he's just so honest, so direct. The truth is right there. And I think people just are drawn to that. And, Jesse's got a really interesting story because, if you go to his website, he talks about his background. And just to read a little bit from his background, he said, in 2002, I found cocaine combined with alcohol and insecurity. And I quickly went from a kid graduating high school to being strung out and barely hanging on. Just after his 18th birthday, he says he committed a robbery, mostly to fuel and pay for his drug addiction. But it was interesting. He said, I was rightly arrested and remember a huge sense of relief that someone had stopped me because I couldn't stop myself. He got an unbelievable sentence. The upper range of his sentencing guideline was 16 years, and the judge doubled that and gave him a 32-year sentence. The inspiring part of his story is that he didn't let that, get into a fetal position and give up. He got better and put his life together in prison. He mentored men. He taught GED classes. He earned a bachelor's degree. He became a licensed journeyman electrician, wrote articles for publications, and he found his own way forward. And since he's gotten out, he's done a lot. I mean, he's started the Second Chancer Foundation, helped people through reentry, putting the pieces together. And I think one of the things he says that's interesting, and I think it's deep. His quote is, "I'd like to see the narrative of justice move from one of punishment to one of healing for the survivor of the crime, for the larger community, and for the person to ensure, the perpetrator to ensure that they did not reoffend. We cannot punish away trauma or addiction or poverty, which are at the root of the vast majority of crimes. Until we shift the narrative and look at healing, we are perpetuating the violence we claim to be locking away." Wow, that is big, that's powerful, that's deep, and I can't wait to get into all that. Before we do, I want to recognize our sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 to 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. Auto Plaza Direct, they are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price and deliver that car to you. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all for full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. The new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Jesse Crossen, welcome in, my man. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you.
So you just went through a motorcycle accident, so I was able to tie you down for an interview because that's about the only way you can stop this man from staying active. How are you doing, man? Okay?
It is I got to do a really strict routine of meditation and exercise and things in prison. And when I got out into the world, it felt like I had just all this energy stuck in place, and now I'm just kind of exploding to fill whatever space is there. And yeah, I don't have a lot of downtime. I don't spend a lot of time still. And all of a sudden, I have an accident that forces me to. And in a weird way, it was the best thing in the world because it slowed me down from some big life decisions I was getting ready to make. It slowed me down from some, kind of things that I was wasting energy on that wasn't really the best use. And it's forced me to sit here and like sometimes be in pain and just reflect on what's really important and really focus my energy in a better way. So as much as I'm not happy to have fractures and be stuck at home and be walking around on crutches and a walker, I think in some ways it was the best thing to happen.
So what was the year that you got out?
I got out in August of 2021, about 2 years ago, or 2 years ago tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, 2 years ago tomorrow, and you've jumped in a moving car and done a lot of things quickly. Jesse, take me back because where your story starts on your website is at 18 years old, but I know there's a story behind that. What was your childhood like? What was going on when you were growing up as Jesse?
That's really hard because I got a big chunks of my childhood that I just can't remember, blank spaces. And I think when we're growing up, we assume that whatever we experience is normal. And it's only been since I've grown up more and talked to people both in prison and mental health professionals. They were like, Jesse, that's not normal. Like, you should probably remember more of your childhood. You should probably have different things. And I have some really good memories. My parents both did the best they could. They were kind of from the opposite ends of the spectrum. My mom came from a good family, went to law school, was a lawyer. My dad was an old criminal, but they found each other because they were both loved drinking. And they found this love of a common activity that thankfully they both stopped when I was about 2. But once they stopped drinking, they realized they didn't have anything in common.
Wow.
You had a guy who was kind of dedicating himself to turning his life around and becoming a substance abuse counselor. And she was focusing on doing real estate law and things because she couldn't stand to actually do criminal law because of, the implications. And, like I said, they showed up doing the best they could, but there was a lot that was lacking. And one of the big things was, a healthy role model. I didn't have people showing me how to live and make healthy decisions and use impulse control and emotional regulation. So I grew up in this kind of crazy space, and in some cases really codependent space, in some cases really angry space. And I was just trying to navigate the best I could. And it really helped actually going to prison and talking to mental health professionals to realize that some of my childhood wasn't normal. Mm-hmm. Because growing up, I was like, man, what is wrong with me? Like,
were you an only child, Jesse?
Fears. I was.
Yeah. And as you got into your school life and high school, was it what you would consider normal?
I guess I went to an alternative school where people spent more time smoking pot than doing schoolwork. So It probably wasn't the best option, but I showed up, I had classmates, I wrestled, I played soccer one year. I did the best that I could, but I was still driven by that insecurity and that feeling of somehow being like fundamentally different and broken. And so I think everybody has that to some degree, but for whatever reason, that was the core of my existence, and that was what everything revolved around.
So you say that at 18 years old, you found cocaine, and was it just like an immediate trigger that changed everything for you?
Yeah, so it was I was about 17 and a half when I first found it. And I remember I like had these one-offs where I bought like a little bit. And I remember the first time I did it, I was like, this is the answer to all my problems. Yeah. This is what I've been looking for. Like all my fears, all my doubts, they're all gone. I feel strong. I feel capable. And then I actually, after high school, after I graduated, started working construction. And the guy who drove me to work every day was a coke dealer. So all of a sudden, not only did I have access, I had immediate daily access. Yeah. He would give me a deal and he would hook me up. And from the day I started with him, I did not stop using cocaine for a single day until I went to jail. It wasn't like a gradual falling in. It was every day, how am I going to get more? What do I need to do?
So getting to, that sounds like it went fast. It sounds like you went, what I was reading too is you took a year off because it sounds like you were planning on going to college, and you took a year off to, like a lot of people do, to, be that person you want to be before you enter into the college world. Your parents, your friends, everybody around you, were they seeing this happen to you, or were you operating in a bubble?
My parents got divorced when I was 7, and there was this rift between me and my dad when I started smoking pot at 16, and he said, look, I'm a recovering addict, and you can't live in my home if you smoke pot. Like, you can't be around me. And so I was living with my mom, who was kind of overworked and in her own anxious state. And I think she went back and forth of trying to like have extreme things and trying to be permissive. So I don't think they really knew what was going on. I do remember I had a teacher at school who wasn't even my teacher, but had taken a special notice of me And I remember talking to her right before I got arrested. I ran into her in like at a restaurant downtown, and then I talked to her since I got out, and she said, Jesse, I used to go into that school and scream at the staff meetings about what are we going to do for this kid? Like he's clearly headed to a wall, and
Mm.
nobody's paying attention, and nobody cares. And she's really the only one I knew that knew it was that bad. I think to everybody else, they just thought, oh, he's just a kid, he's making mistakes, boys will be boys. And yeah, I really wish somebody had stepped in, but I don't really know what they could have done other than remove me from where I was, because everything about my life was in a negative place. I was hanging out with the wrong people. I was doing the wrong things. I didn't have the coping skills. It would have really been taking me into a completely different environment to make a difference.
And you weren't ready for that. I mean, that sounds like you were trying to find your way through the escape of drugs, and that to be able to get away from that, you'd have to make a decision yourself that I'm stopping. And so walk me through when your nightmare happened. What happened that day, that event? What was the situation?
So it was two separate events. So the first was the robbery, and we basically had run through every outlet. We burned every bridge. We owed everybody money. We didn't have anything else we could pawn, and we were trying to get more cocaine. And one of my co-defendants had worked at this restaurant and told us his story about how, these are terrible people and they only hire undocumented immigrants and they only pay them $2 an hour and they keep all the cash. And so we steal from them. We're really like Robin Hood. We're like reclaiming the riches from the bad people. And I don't have any idea whether this was true, and it doesn't matter if it was true. It was just a story we told ourselves to justify this horrible thing.
Sure.
And so we, in our minds, thought, okay, maybe this is, not such a bad thing. But I remember the day of the robbery, and it was only supposed to be a breaking and entering. We were trying to break into this house and grab the money and leave. And so we waited until all the cars were gone. We came back to the house, and there was a maid there. So while my co-defendant and I, the one who told me about it, broke in downstairs, my other co-defendant went in the front door and had a gun and terrified this woman and, put her through hell. And again, all for nothing, all for this dream of like, hey, if we get this $50,000 somehow miraculously in cash, we'll be able to keep getting high. We didn't get anything. And we terrorized the woman who was there. We terrorized the family who had to come home to a home that was ransacked. We did all this for nothing, for no money, for no win, for no plan, and just rode off into the night. And sure enough, 2 days later, I found another co-connect. I found somebody who was willing to front me 5 more ounces. So all of a sudden, we were getting high again and partying again. Basically, had forgotten all about it. And then the second event happened, and that was one of the things that happened when I first started doing cocaine. Was initially I felt strong, but pretty immediately afterwards, I started being paranoid, and I started feeling weak and afraid of everyone and everything. So when someone offered to sell me a gun, I was like, yeah, absolutely. Like this, I had never cared about guns. I grew up in the South. It wasn't a big deal to me, but I felt like I had to have it. So all of a sudden I have this gun. And then once we're partying 2 days after the robbery, this guy who had sold me the gun, he says, man, oh my God, my girlfriend, like she's in trouble. So I go talk to him, and these two guys are at their house, and his pregnant girlfriend is there, and they're threatening her and saying that they're going to bring him the gun back or money or cocaine or else. And so now newly high after like barely, skating by with a tiny bit of powder over the last 2 days and feeling strong and knowing that I have a gun, I got on the phone and told them they were going to leave or else. And we went back and forth and threatened each other and beat our chests. And I drove to meet him. And just as there was a moment before the robbery where I had this idea that like, I need to not do this. This is a terrible idea.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it was like, no, this was cowardice. Like I've got to back my friends up. I can't let them down. I've got to be good. Not realizing that cowardice was going through with it when I knew it was wrong. Like that was the true cowardice. But I had that same feeling when I got to the parking lot where I was meeting them. And I was like, I need to not be here. Like, this is like somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get killed. So I drove off, and they chased me. And so they're chasing me down the road and swerving like they're going to run me off the road. And finally, the passenger, they pull up right beside me, and he reaches around behind him to grab something. And in my mind, he was grabbing a gun. Like I couldn't think of any other reason they'd be there, what he'd be doing. So I reached down and grabbed that same gun, and I shot him. And it's just luck that they lived. I mean, I very well could have killed 2 people and spent the rest of my life in prison, and it's through no choice or action of my own that I missed.
Wow. Sounds like a movie. So what happens after that?
So I did hit them. I just didn't kill them. So they kind of swerved off to the side of the road. They ended up going to the hospital and like giving a statement. So then there was an APB out for me and for everybody, and they tied us together with the robbery. So it was very shortly after that they came to get us. We had this kind of brief day of, oh, my co-defendant and I, we're going to take off. We're going to go to Colorado and we're going to start over. And we didn't have any brain power. And we had gone through the 5 ounces of coke in just a few days, and we were completely out. And so I ended up passing out. And then when I woke up, it was them yelling that the SWAT team was outside. And I tried to run outside and run up to the top of the steps because it was an over-under duplex, thinking like, hey, I can go out the back of the top and they'll think I'm not the same guy, and walked right into the barrel of a gun. And the officer saying, I will shoot you dead, boy. And just being like, all right, that's it. Like, I'm done. And it really was a feeling of giving up and kind of hoping he would shoot me and kind of hoping I would slip backwards down the steps because I didn't want to deal with it anymore. but it ended up being a relief because I didn't have to die to give up. I didn't have to die to start over. I just didn't realize that was possible at the time.
So they take you down. What's going through your mind? Because you're a young kid at this time. I mean, what are you thinking driving away? The SWAT team's there. They're taking you away. You're not sure exactly what happens. You know, you've never been in this situation. What's going through your mind? How are you dealing with this moment?
I don't know that I was thinking anything. I literally remember just sitting there looking out the window of the car and feeling more of a sense of peace because at least I wasn't hurting anybody. At least I wasn't hurting myself. At least I was just done. And it really was just kind of being still for the first time. And since I started, 6 months earlier.
So you get taken to the county jail. That has to be, and for anybody who's ever gone through the county jail system, that's the bottom of the barrel. What, as a young kid being in there, were you scared?
Oh, I was horrified. I mean, I think the good thing is that a lot of people go from a really nice standard of living to losing something and they feel like it's a loss. I mean, I was smoking crack and living four of us in a tiny one-bedroom apartment and scrambling to get by, so it didn't feel like I was losing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the first day when they stuck me in an isolation cell, they kind of detox basically, and I spent 3 days of sleeping. And I would wake up for a couple minutes and I would eat, and then I would just go back to sleep. And so I had this kind of period of adaptation where I was just living here and sleeping. And then, I went to the first cell block, and I was like, this isn't comfortable. What am I doing? But it wasn't bad. It wasn't as bad as I imagined.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just kind of slow, like, okay, I guess this is it. I guess this is going to be life. But I remember the first time I was horrified. Once they moved me to like a permanent housing thing, I asked them, I was like, oh my God, did they ever just lock us in the cells? And they were like, yeah, they do it for like days and weeks at a time if they're short staffed. Like, we're just stuck in there. And I was horrified at the idea they would just stick three of us in this cell and just leave us there for weeks. But then I realized, like, no, this is just what I have to expect going forward. And it really was. I mean, that was my experience over the next 19 years.
How long did you have to wait until you were, you get your attorney, they start throwing out all these different things? How long did that process last for you?
It was about 10 months.
10 months?
So they brought all the charges. They ended up actually bringing more charges because originally it was just a breaking and entering. They modified that to a robbery. They just modified a bunch of charges and ended up with 12 felonies. I pleaded guilty to those 12 felonies, and then the sentencing was, I think, a month and a half after that. And so about 10 months after I was arrested, I actually got to go to court and hear my sentencing. What
did you think of your attorney at the time? How did you get your attorney, and what was he as part of your defense?
So, I started off with a public defender, and I honestly wish I had stayed with that. But my mom, because she was a real estate attorney, knew a lot of attorneys in town. They did the continuing legal education together. So she hired somebody that she thought was going to be kind of a hotshot. I mean, for a plea bargain or like a plea agreement, which wasn't even a written plea agreement, there wasn't a lot he could do.
Yeah.
He was a smart guy. He clearly knew his stuff, but he also, there were a couple things that he didn't tell me. Like, I remember when I pleaded guilty, the judge said, oh, by the way, I don't have to stay within sentencing guidelines, right? And I didn't know that. So I looked at my lawyer and I said, should I? He was like, no, don't say anything. I said, okay, sure. Like, yeah. And then at the time of sentencing, the original guidelines were 8 to 13 years. And he was like, hey, this I appreciate. He said, look, you did some really bad stuff. Like, you got to go away. You deserve to go away. You're going to get 10 years. And like, you just have to deal with it. And that made sense to me. That seemed really fair. And then when they modified the guidelines to 10 to 16, he didn't want to object, even though we had a case to object. He said, you should just take this because the judge has seen the old guidelines. You'll probably still get 10 years. So when they read out the 32 years, it was a shock because it seemed like it was the opposite of what he said. But I also don't know that there's anything he could have done differently.
Well, he probably could have. I mean, he could have objected, and you don't know what happens with that whole scenario. But it sounded like it was a really confusing moment because the judge continued to say, this is suspended. And once they got through with it, the attorney says, well, wait, what did you sentence him to? And he said, well, I'm going to have to go back. And the court reporter had to actually go back and basically subtract what had been off of these 100 years or whatever that he had done. And it subtracted back to 32 years with 2 years of, rehab with drug rehab or whatever. But I can't imagine that moment though, because you were thinking 10 and you had kind of come to terms with that's what I'm going to have to do. And then they subtract all this out and there's only moments that happen in that. And then it's 32.
Yeah.
And you're what are you 19, 20 years old?
Still 18 years old.
18 years old. Man, what's going through your mind in that moment?
Yeah, you talked about your deepest fear. I think there were really two parallel reactions right there. My deepest fear had always been that there was something wrong with me and I was irredeemable and I was broken. And that felt like a validation of my deepest fear. Like this judge who this is what he does for a living, who knows people, has weighed me and found me wanting. Like I'm just done. My life is over. I'm worthless. And there was also a part of me that was really angry. It was like, look, this isn't fair. This isn't what they said. This isn't right. Like my life shouldn't be over. Like F this. And those two things kind of grew. And those were really the two forces I struggled with. Because there were a lot of times that I gave up. I think in the introduction you said he didn't just go into a fetal position. There were a lot of times I went into a fetal position and gave up.
Yeah.
But I continued to get up and I continued to find a way to believe that it didn't have to be the end of my story and that there would be another chapter. But that wasn't an easy thing. And there were a lot of times where it was a struggle to even get out of bed some days.
Well, I think that's the difference, though. When I say you didn't get in a fetal position, I think whenever all of us get down, I mean, I had a rock bottom moment, and that rock bottom moment either means that you're done or you figure out a new beginning of that. And I don't know, until you hit those rock bottom moments in your life, you don't know how you're going to react to it. You've lived a certain way your life. For me, it was, wait a minute. I was like, I got hit by a bolt of lightning. Like, what the hell are you doing, Brent? You're the glass half full guy. And I shook myself out of it and basically shaking myself out of feeling like a victim to understanding I needed to be a survivor. And it appears to me of the things I've read with you, Jesse, is that yes, you got knocked down. The question is how do you get back up? And, I think there were periods of time, especially looking through when you got back to that jail cell, even the jail, the guards were saying, man, are you okay? I mean, this is a rough day, man. Jesse, you all right? And I even think they put you away thinking that you might harm yourself to lock you away so that you didn't. It's a lot to think about.
It was a lot to experience. And that was, it didn't really hit me fully until I was in that isolation cell. I got back to the jail and they'd packed my property up and I had this little radio and there's a Dave Matthews song called Gravedigger. And he has this line where he says, when I die, bury me shallow so I can still feel the rain. And that was it. I just cracked and just started like sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And yeah, I needed that. I think that every time I've struggled and every time I've hit a low point, I've needed to collapse in some meaningful way. And it's had to been a tearful bout, or it's had to be anger, it's had to be sadness or hopelessness. But I need to experience, because otherwise I'm still hanging on to this illusion of control.
Yeah.
As long as I'm hanging on to that illusion of control, I'm still pushing a little further, trying to get away with a little more, or trying to justify a little more. And it takes those total collapses for me to actually change and start doing something different.
So you get taken away. How long were you there in jail until you got to the prison?
I was in the jail for about 2 more weeks, and then I got sent to a receiving prison.
Okay.
And that was literally only because my dad was able to pull a favor. And things are bad now. Like back then, you would usually have to wait in the jail 6 months after sentencing. Now guys are waiting like 4 and 5 years. It's horrible. But my dad, because he was a substance use counselor, had actually done a presentation for the head of mental health for the Department of Corrections, got on the phone and was like, hey, I've never asked for a favor in my life. My son's in jail. Can you get him somewhere? Can you get him somewhere where we can get help? Like, I'm worried to death about him. And so they got me to that receiving center within 2 weeks, which was pretty amazing.
And how long were you at the receiving center?
About 3.5 months.
So when you finally make it to prison, are you walking in thinking, because you've been in jail, so that you've had to kind of adapt to that world, are you walking in with any particular strategies of how I'm going to handle this unknown world, or do you just walking in thinking, here I am?
I definitely I was young and I was hot-headed, and everybody told me if you get in a bad situation, swing first and ask questions later, and I put myself in a lot of bad situations by doing that. But it was, I just didn't understand, because everybody in the jail had told me these parallel stories. Like, you're going to get down to prison and you're going to see people getting stabbed and you're going to see booty bandits. It's going to be terrible. But also, oh my God, it's so much better and you're going to love it, and the food and the freedom. And I just didn't understand what they were talking about. So I didn't know what to expect. But I came, and what I saw was just a little civilization. Like, I understand how Australia happened. It's just people getting by the best they can, and a lot of them have tempers, a lot of conflicts happen, and there are issues over scarcity and money, and people fight over stupid stuff because there's nothing else. But it was just people getting along. And so once I got there, and once I really kind of adjusted, it just took me maturing. It wasn't actually the place that was so dangerous. It was me being dumb and putting myself in dumb situations. Well,
and you were maturing as a person from 18 years old on. So, I've interviewed a couple of people that have grown up in prison. One that got sentenced when he was 15 years old and to life, and growing up in prison, you have to figure out, and like you said, Jesse, it's a primitive environment, but it is its own social environment. And, how you handle yourself in there is, for me, I found that there was a lot of people that were helpful to me and were, that was my biggest surprise in prison, of people trying to help me get set up. And I wasn't expecting that. I was told all the other things, don't give somebody something, if they're giving you something, they're going to want something back, and they're going to be able to blackmail you, and all those different things that kind of freak you out. But what I found is that I had, like within the first hour, people help. Hey, you're going to need these shower shoes. You get your own, commissary. I'll give you these now. I'll show you how to make your bed, military stuff, all these different things that I was like, wow, these guys, they're living in their own society, and they're trying to make you comfortable enough that you can live in this society with them. And they check you out too. I mean, when you walk into a prison, it is like the movies where they check you out. What's this guy going to be like? Because you're entering their world. Now you're there. Now you're part of their world.
Yeah. And I mean, it really is. It's so funny that we have a system of people who don't want to follow the rules on the outside go to prison, and you have just as many, if not more, rules imposed by the people that live there. Like we've said, we're rule breakers and we're outlaws, and we go into a place where we have this strict set of rules that you better follow or else. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, they give you the pamphlet of the prison rules. You've got to learn the inmate rules, and that's part of the setup. Okay, so how did you start living in that world, Jesse? Because you did a lot of things once you got into that world, but you were there for a long time. When did that adjustment for you start to change? That taking a deep breath and like, man, I'm gonna make something of myself better. How did that process work for you?
It was pretty gradual. Like some of the things started early. My mom was so freaked out about my sentence that she got me enrolled in college classes. She basically took out a loan so that I could start going to college. And so from 7 months in the jail, I was taking college classes. So every weekend when I was working, or every time during the week, I was filling out assignments and get things ready and going over to the library to have proctored exams. And I was focused on college. I mean, it took 15 years. It wasn't like I'm in a normal schedule, but I just had something to rely on.
Sure.
But for real, I mean, the first couple of years, I think all I did was work out. I got a job in the factory, so I was working in the factory. I was working out, and I was staying to myself. I was reading.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't getting high, but I wasn't also interacting with anybody in a meaningful way. And then there was a guy who pulled me aside one time. We were actually waiting to go do an interview for a job. And he said, look, I see you, and everything you're doing is positive. You're working out, you're reading, you're studying. But one day you're going to wake up, and you're going to realize all that isn't enough. Like, life is about people. And until you figure out a way to have, relationship with people and have community, you're going to be miserable. And that was one of the most important things that anybody ever told me, because I realized, I'm trying to set myself aside or apart from everybody in here, but I'm not any different. We all did terrible stuff. We all, caused harm. We're all trying to find our way. And it doesn't mean I have to be friends with everybody, but I have to find a way to open myself up to some sense of community. And that was where I started finding people to call friends, but also where I'm finding ways to help. Like, hey, this guy needs help getting tutored, for his GED. I'm going to step in and I'm going to do that. Like, I'm actually going to take a role. And in that, I found the greatest sense of meaning and satisfaction I had ever found in my life.
Yeah, that's so powerful too. I think when you do something like that in prison, it really starts filling you up. And it's a different way to eat your time too. You're focusing on something or somebody, helping them. You're seeing results. You also, working out in prison is a big deal because you have time to do that. You get in the best shape of your life. You read the most books you've ever read in your life. By the way, you have quite a reading list. If you go to your website, you actually provide the books that changed your life, which I think is cool. As far as being in prison, were you connected at all to the outside world?
Yeah, very much so. And I think that was the main thing that gave me a chance, because when I was sitting in that jail, I had given up. Like, I really didn't believe in myself, but I had people showing up day after day to believe in me and to lift me up. I had my family, I had friends. I mean, this is what breaks my heart, and this is one of the reasons we're talking about doing a letter writing mentorship thing, because I was looking in jail, and every night they would do a mail call, and every single night they would call my name, and usually multiple times. And I would watch these 4 or 5 guys who would go down there every night and wait and never get a letter.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling so heartbroken, like, I don't deserve this any more than they did. I am no better than they are, and yet I get the support and they didn't. And that was the beginning of me realizing there's just so much inequity in the system, that people don't have the same chance and they don't have the same support, and we're not going to have the same experience.
So true. I was lucky enough, my wife came every weekend, and the kids, she would pick up along the way because they were in college. And And then I saw heartbreaking things where a wife would show up with divorce papers. Somebody, got in really good shape, was excited about his visit, and his whole life was devastated by, not only had he lost everything, but now he's lost his family. So it does affect you really deeply when you're getting the support and you're seeing that other people aren't, and they're having to walk a different path in the same world that you're living. And you can see how much darker that can be if you don't have the support. So Jesse, you started mentoring. You got into the being a licensed electrician. How did that happen for you?
So I looked at everything as a matter of options. Uh-huh. This is one of the things that somebody told me in my childhood that I really lived by, and I didn't listen to. I wish I'd listened to when I was younger. And they said that every decision you make either creates more or fewer options for you. And they said, I don't care what you do. I don't care if you want to be a rocket scientist, you want to be a trash man. I just want you to have the option to do whatever it is you want. So I looked at that in prison, and I took every job I could that would open an opportunity. So like I worked in the factory so I could learn to do CNC machines and do CAD drawing and learn to, work with my hands. And then I worked in the law library. So if I got out, I could be a paralegal. And I worked in maintenance because I wanted to learn a practical skill. So I basically paid somebody to get me on the job as a maintenance worker, as an electronics worker, which taught me all the low voltage stuff, the camera stuff, the network stuff, the coax, but also made it eligible for me to work, get my hours as an electrical apprentice. So I was able to join the apprenticeship program. And again, I had to kind of like lie, cheat, and steal through that because you're only allowed to take one trade. You're not allowed to take the apprenticeship till you've taken the trade. They put these barriers in place of actually getting an education. And the better kind of scam artist or criminal you are, the more chance you have to actually get an education. So by working in through that back door and ingratiating myself and paying people and doing everything, I managed to get in that apprenticeship. And 4 years later, I had enough on-the-job hours from my maintenance job and enough book hours from the trainings I was doing in the apprenticeship. I took my journeyman test, and I became a licensed electrician.
Wow. Well, and the other thing that's people probably don't know, when you go to prison, the place is run by prisoners, whether it's electricity, whether it's HVAC, whether the lawn's being mowed, the food's being made, whatever's happening, it's all happens with prisoners, and prisoners take care of the place, clean the place. And, I didn't know that. I thought that we were prisoners and, we were locked up and, everything was taken care of. And once I got there, I said, oh my God, everybody here does, for the most part, it's all taken care of by prisoners, and the COs, they come around and count you to make sure you haven't left. Weird environment.
It shocked me too, because I assumed like, oh, nobody in here would be able to run things.
Right.
And then you realize these are the most talented, maintenance people. These are the most talented cooks
right.
Working with, they don't even give them like the flour they're supposed to have, so they figure something else out. And the ingenuity of what people do in there, I mean, they could survive in a super society. They could just stay out of trouble when they get out. But we're really conditioned to survive in that society and not anywhere else. Like we're conditioned to be really good prisoners and not conditioned to be good people in the world. And I always just thought that was such a broken way of doing it.
It is. It's a contradiction of why you're in there. How did you, because I know that along the way that you ended up getting your sentence commuted to 19 years, you went 19 years, but was there a process that was going on when you were working in the law library and trying to make something happen and have an impact on your sentence?
Sure. So in Virginia, we abolished parole in 1995, so there was no parole and there was no chance of that. The only possibility of getting a sentence commutation was a conditional pardon from the governor. And, up until even when I put mine in, that was an impossibility. You would get 4 commutations at the end of the governor's term because, 3 were PR and 1 person had done a really big campaign donation. It wasn't reasonable. So I did mine, not even really expecting it to work, but I did it because I said, hey, like I want to do everything I can to try to get myself out of here. And then that way I know I can rest knowing that I haven't just had an unexplored opportunity or I haven't given up. Like I've tried everything I can and the rest is out of my hands. So I waited until 16 and a half years, which was the high point of my sentencing guidelines. And at 16 and a half years, I started putting all the paperwork together and organizing and writing this petition and asking people for letters of support and including like articles I had published, just like including all this stuff together. And after about 6 months, I had it all together. I was ready to go. And I sent it off to the governor and just didn't think anything about it. It was like, okay, maybe this will happen, maybe not, whatever. But this weird like series of events started happening. This local reporter reached out to me And this was we couldn't have contact because you're not allowed to have recording devices inside the prison. So we did it all by phone. And so we had an interview because she was talking about the abolition of parole. And she had somebody who was super law and order and saying why this was a good thing. And then she wanted me to be the counterpoint of why I thought it wasn't a good thing. And I remember, like, I was a prison celebrity for, I don't know, like a week. Because in that interview, I didn't just talk about me. I talked about, like, have you ever seen a 16-year-old kid get sentenced to 50 years or get a life sentence? Have you ever seen a 16-year-old kid not get 90 years for a robbery in which nobody was harmed? Like, that's what I see every day. And it was amazing because, like, all the gang members, all the straight people, all the everything was, like, coming up and giving me hugs. They were like, bro, you looked out for everybody. That meant a lot.
Yeah.
And that was part of, I think, the beginning of my dream of advocacy. But then the governor had this huge scandal where he was called a racist, and his response to that, I think very reasonably, was, okay, like, let's look at inequity in our criminal justice system, in our schools, and other places. And that governor ended up doing more for prison reform and more for clemency and pardons than all Virginia governors in history combined. So it ended up being kind of a perfect storm of situations that led to literally one day waking up and by 2 o'clock in that afternoon being told I was going home.
That's fascinating because, you know, that governor went through his own nightmare and being more or less shamed by the nation. And maybe that's what brought him to maybe a different type of understanding, getting these letters and understand. The other thing you were doing, you were writing and being published in publications. Did that affect how you were perceived or the connections you were making on the outside when you were doing this?
I mean, I think, you know, just the same thing as options with jobs. I had a buddy who told me early on, and he was this like young gangster kid, but he said, hey man, if you got $1 million friends, you got $1 million, because who wouldn't give your friend $1? And that was when I realized that it really is about your network and who you know and who you can count on. And so I wrote letters every week to people I knew, to people I didn't know, to religious groups, to organizations. I just wrote letters to everybody and tried to develop as many relationships as possible because I knew maybe there'd be some way I could help or maybe there'd be some way they could help me. And every time I had something published in the newspaper or published in a magazine, I would get a few more letters or a few more people signing up on JPay, the like 4-pay email service, and more people kind of coming into my orbit. So when it came time to ask for letters of support, I had them from political leaders and business leaders and you know, just people from all over in all walks of life. And that's why my petition was more than 300 pages long. And only a short portion of that was actually my petition. The rest was letters of support. And that was amazing because that was really as much for like maybe getting me out of prison. I needed that. Like I needed the validation that I wasn't worthless. I needed the validation these people believed in me because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to keep going.
Wow. That's just listening to that, Jesse, because you and I talked before we got on here. This podcast goes into 276 prisons and this gets thousands of listens a week. And what you just said is a big tip for somebody not to give up and keep hope alive by just staying at it. Just stay at it. Keep trying because you've got time to keep trying to make a difference in your life. To maybe you have an outcome and you had an outcome. I can't imagine what was your feeling? How did you get the news that you were that you'd been successful?
So I was called into the counselor's office. I was actually over on the phone because it was one of those dormitories. You only have 4 phones or 80 some people, and you always have to fight over the phone. And there was always somebody who would look out for me. So I had a spot, and I was trying to get through to my then girlfriend. And the counselor was like, "Hey, come here." And this was during COVID when like she wouldn't let people in the office without a mask. It was super serious. And she waved me in, and I didn't know what was going on. And that was the only reason I wasn't really off put, because as people know, you get called in the counselor's office because somebody died or somebody's sick or something horrible happened.
Right.
But she was so excited. I was like, man, I'm kind of scared, but like maybe it's not a big deal. And the phone was off the hook, and there was somebody on speakerphone, and they just said, "Hey, Mr. Crossen, you're sitting down." And I said, "No, why?" They said, "Because you're leaving Coffeewood today. You've been granted a pardon." I mean, and that sat me down, like straight to a knee, and like tears in my eyes, but also not really believing because it's
didn't
hard
seem
to
real.
Something like that could be real.
Wow. So I want to talk a little bit about COVID too, because you had been in prison for a long time, but I've talked to people who were in there that went in and didn't know anything different with COVID. I'm interested in what was different in your world when COVID hit in the prison world.
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, it was this kind of collective existential fear because we'd all seen the episode of The Walking Dead where you had the zombies in the prison, and nobody knew what was happening. And so we were afraid the guards would leave us in there. And I remember there was this one guy who worked maintenance who was like the best at kind of jerry rigging things. He actually built a torch. He ran 240 to his cell and put it in behind the light and put a plate up so you couldn't see it. And then he was going to use 240 with this wire he had bundled under his bed to try to cut through his door if we got locked in there. He like planned all this out. He was like, nope, I'm not staying stuck. But for the most part, I mean, we were terrified. Like, all I did was stock up on ramen noodles. I literally had, like, I would get all the empty containers and fill them up with water because I was afraid, like, that the power would go out or the water would go out, or we'd just sit in there to starve and have to figure out how to get out. And that wasn't the reality. But what happened was the first time we had a case, they locked the prison down, and we stayed in our cell for months. And I was really lucky because I had been moved to the honor pod at that point. So I had a single cell. But for all those days and nights in the cell by myself was the first time I kind of wished I had a cell partner. Like, I wished I had somebody to talk to or a way to interact. And then they slowly started letting things up, but it was still, you know, we wouldn't get outside regularly. We might be outside for, you know, every other day for an hour. We might, you know, get a little bit of this, but you couldn't go to class. You couldn't do a program. And again, I was just really lucky because people knew that I wanted to do things, that I was at that point teaching classes in the mental health program, was leading groups. I was doing everything I could. So the head psychologist had developed this program statewide to make videos, because the idea was, hey, if we don't have GED classes, we need GED videos.
Right.
If we don't have mental health classes, we need mental health videos. So she recruited me to do a series of videos teaching Spanish and a series of videos teaching nonviolent communication. So I got to get called out when everybody else was just locked inside, go over to this classroom with this psychologist who was great and amazing all the way around, and make videos, like the beginning of my social media career, not even realizing it, that were then played in every prison across the state. And so I got to actually do something that would contribute to the benefit of everybody around. And that, again, that's where I find meaning, and that's where I find purpose, and that's where I find satisfaction.
I love that. Love that. How long was it between you getting and from your counselor telling you that you won, you're going to go home, to when you actually got to go home?
It was an hour and a half.
Wow.
They told me, get ready. I ran back in, and I had just finished working out for that phone call. So I ran in the shower, and normally you like tried to leave a shower between people and you're over respectful. I was like, bro, I'm sorry, bro. I got to get in here. I washed up real quick. I got out. And I called this kid over to my booth, because it was this kid he was a good kid. He had an anger problem, but no family, no connections on the outside. Like, he had just never had a chance in life. And so he didn't have a lot. So I called him over, and I was like, hey man, I got a bunch of stuff. Here's my food. Here's my shoes. Here's my hygiene. I think I'm coming back, but maybe not. Like, I don't know. So if I don't come back, this is all yours. Take to your bunk. If I don't come back, enjoy it. And it's so funny because he didn't know anything about it, and he thought I was going to beat somebody up. He thought I was going to get in trouble, and I was just giving him my stuff. And I just remember being like, no, it's going to be all right. And so I went, and I had to sign all the paperwork in the front office, and I had to go to medical, and I had to go to property. And then it still didn't seem real. Like I said, I'm still kind of like looking over my shoulder to find out if it's a hidden camera moment or they're going to take it back. And then finally I walk back into the dorm because they tell me to officially pack my stuff, and most of it's already gone. And everybody is standing there and like clapping and giving me hugs and shaking my hand. And I was like, holy shit, it's real. Like, these people, like, I'm actually going home. And there's one guy in particular who I could not stand. We almost got into fighting over the phone a dozen times. And even he was like, bro, he shook my hand. He gave me a hug. He was like, I love you, bro. Take care of yourself. Do good out there. And it was one of those things where it was like, even the people we don't like, something about seeing somebody succeed and get out and do good transcends that. Because we do want the best for people, especially people who are doing well.
Love it. So you walk out of there. Who's there on the other side?
So I got to the front office, and about like 15 feet away. And I couldn't go over there because I had to fill out all this paperwork, the final round of paperwork at the thing. And it was COVID. So I hadn't seen my mom in a year and a half. Like, there'd been no visits. There was no contact. And so I'm over there, and I'm like looking over, and I'm looking over, and I was like, I don't know what to do. Then finally, after I fill out all the paperwork, get my last packet of stuff, I go over there, and I pick my mom up. She's a really little woman, and I pick her up, and I'm just kind of standing there, and she whispers in my ear. She goes, Jesse, let's get the F out of here. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. Like, cool. So we went out the front, and I still remember the sights and the colors, and I just remember being blown away. And fundamentally, there's no difference between the outside of the prison and the inside. Like, I've been outside on the rec yard, but something about it was just so overwhelming that I started kind of tearing up, and I walked to the car, and I was still half numb, but it was like I could feel the pressure on that numbness, like almost like draining down the sides of it. And I didn't know what to think. And then my then girlfriend, who I hadn't met at this point, because again, there's been no visits, but we've been talking on the phone all the time, she had gotten the news that I was getting out in 30 minutes when she was 45 minutes away. So we drove down to the end of the driveway of the prison, and we drove to the little driveway next door to a farm that was blocked off. We just sat there, and I remember just sitting there, like, looking around. My mom was like, let's get a picture. And there's this like bewildered look on my face in the picture of just like, I don't know where I'm at or what's going on. And then my girlfriend drove up, and she drove up, and we just looked at each other, and I was like, "Oh, you're real. Like, this is nice. Like, this is." And we had done something that I think everybody should do, especially in the realm of online dating. We had reverse catfished each other. Like, everybody always puts their best picture and
Yeah,
all their
yeah.
best characteristics.
You
She was
reversed
like,
it.
"Look, COVID hasn't been good. I've been out of shape. Things are rough. Like, I lost my hair a while ago." And I had done the same thing. I was like, "Oh, I'm out of shape. Like, I walk like Steven Seagal. I got a bad tooth." It was perfect because when we actually saw each other, everything was better than we expected, and it was the best approach I ever could have taken.
Oh, wow. Wow. I heard somebody said that was on this show, the difference of being inside prison to walking out of prison is going from black and white to color. And I think that's
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a good analogy to how you feel. You feel like your world turns back into color. So it's been 19 years. I there's a lot that's changed in 19 years. I mean, well, I should ask you, what was your thoughts of moving back into this world 19 years later? What were the things that you saw that felt different?
Well, I mean, everything. And it was also that I didn't, I had spent all those years, or at least maybe after like the first 3 or 4 when I was messing up, focused on reading like parenting books and self-help books and business books and like trying to have an understanding of what was coming. And even with all that, more than a decade of preparation, I was overwhelmed by trying to shop at Costco. I was overwhelmed sitting in a CVS just trying to buy soap and body wash, but not knowing which of the 30 things to select. I was overwhelmed by a public space where I'm putting my back against the wall and people are looking at me like I'm crazy because they don't understand what I'm doing. And so it really was every part of life that overwhelmed me. And I think it was at first the thing that I remember so vividly was the technology. Because the first thing I did was go buy a phone. Because like you have to have a phone, but I would get up, I would like post something on Facebook, and then I would sit down and I would notice everybody was still on their phone. And every room I walked into, people were on their phone. And I would go in and people would be like texting each other from different sides of the couch. And I was like, what is wrong with y'all? Don't you see this world out here? It's amazing. But then the bizarre thing for me was then 2 weeks after I got out, I started posting on social media, and all of a sudden I have like 100 comments and then 1,000 comments. And all of a sudden the phone started to become my life. And I became one of those very people that I didn't understand 2 weeks before.
Wow. Yeah. Technology in 19 years would have been a gigantic change. And that is a big change is people, even in the 3 years that I was gone, I noticed that people went from using their phone to watching TV and also being on their phone. The phone is, I realized that the phone had become such a different part of what was going on because of the notifications and everything that people were getting. I don't know if it's a good thing, but it's a definite change. Now that, I'm 6 years removed from being, I'm one of those people too. So it's addictive. I don't know if there's any turning back from it, but it's clearly part of our lives that has changed it forever, I believe. And whatever that technology evolves to, it'll change it even more. So, Jesse, you get out. Where do you live? How do you move in society? What's going on?
So I was really lucky because that was the other thing is they were telling me when I was signing my paperwork, they were like, hey, if we don't get this approval for your home plan, like you can't go home. And it's such an unfair situation where even if they've determined like your situation is unfair, your sentence should be commuted, if you didn't have a home plan, you couldn't go on a pardon. So I was lucky that my mother had a place that I could go to. She had kind of like a basement downstairs and a little separate space. And so I went to live with my mother for a month. And Courtney, my then girlfriend, and I talked about it. And we were like, hey, we shouldn't move in right away. We should like take this slow and easy. And so I was there for a month, and just the kind of dynamics of being in my childhood home, it was a different place, but
Sure.
The same environment. I couldn't do it. It was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
And I was really lucky because I found somebody in town, actually the ex-wife of the Commonwealth attorney, which is just convenient, was like, hey, I've got this like, what do you call it? Like mother-in-law dwelling behind my house. I love your story. I want to give you a chance. Do you want to move in?
Wow.
And I immediately jumped on that. I was able to move into this place in town, and all of a sudden I'm not spending 45 minutes in the car every day just to get to work. I'm not dealing with the same craziness with probation. Because where I was at the very end of a probation district. Like if this is a district, I was right here, but everything, like the city and everywhere I worked was over here. So technically every day I went to work, I was violating the terms of my 50-mile radius probation. It was just insane.
Yeah.
And my PO said, oh, don't worry about it. And I was like, hey, with all due respect, like, no, like I'm going to worry about it because you're not violating me because you told me not to worry about it. And I had to fight with him about that and fight with him about something else. So once I got moved into the city, there was no trouble. My PO was great. Like everything was great. And life was just a whole lot easier.
So did you go into what work did you do?
And again, there was no preparation. So the first call I got, and it was like 2 days after I got out. There was a former attorney, a civil rights attorney, who was just an absolutely amazing human being, who said, "Hey, Jesse, I'm selling my house and I want to, fix it up. I've got some things I need to do before I sell it. Would you be willing to come do some work?" And I think at the time he was thinking like he could teach me a skill. He was like, "Hey, I'll teach you some carpentry stuff." And after about an hour, he was like, "I think you know as much or more than I do. Like, I'm just going to let you work. I'm going to go back in the house." So I spent, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, like building stairs and fixing up his deck and replacing planks. And it was amazing because it was in the middle of nowhere. It was quiet. I was working by myself. So I got this sense of peace that I really needed. I got to like unwind from all those years of prison in a place that felt safe.
Yeah, that's cool.
From there, I got a job with a publisher. I'd applied for the local university because they have an equal practice hiring program. And so I was going to go be an electrician at the university and make decent money and have good benefits, but it was going to be a really strict schedule. Like I would have had to stay on that schedule. And somebody else, the local publisher, said, "Hey, I'll give you a work from home job. It won't be quite as much money, but you'll have the freedom to do more." And as I go back to the idea of options versus plans, I was like, no, I need this thing that has more options. And that allowed me to post more on social media. It allowed me to travel. It allowed me to speak places. It gave me the flexibility to do a lot more with my life that I wouldn't have been able to do. And I'm glad that I took that path because in the moment it looked really stupid to give up great benefits and more money, but it allowed me to be where I am today.
So what do you see where you're at today? I know you're talking about books, right? Maybe you've written a book. What's the future hold for you, Jesse? Because you're just getting, as I see it, you're a guy on the move. You haven't been out very long, but you've done a lot to this point. What do you see yourself? What's your future?
And that's where I give myself a lot of pressure because, like I said, tomorrow is going to be 2 years. And I'm like, why haven't I figured this out? What's going on? And I had a friend who flew in when I had my accident, flew in from Portland. And she's like, "Jesse, for the first 2 years, all I did was deliver pizza. I didn't go to school.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything. Like, give yourself an effing break." So the problem is I love doing the work that I do, especially with, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. At the same time, it can be really triggering and exhausting. There's some nights that I come home from that kid who just got out getting locked back up or some tragedy or some new shooting that I just can't deal with it. I just get home and I just collapse. And so there's a part of me that wants to get into a different space or do something different. I'm on the advisory board for tech conference this year at the end of the month. I started a company that we hadn't managed to get the patents on to try to develop some technology that would help people who are incarcerated and help transition. So I've got a bunch of things in the fire, but the reality is I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to just go to a graduate program or go to a PhD program and spend 4 years focusing on something so I don't have to wonder about all the what ifs. But part of me also wants to, keep doing what I'm doing and saying yes to everything and taking every opportunity because for all those years I couldn't do any of it. And I think that was the blessing and the curse because for all those years I told myself I will never miss out on another opportunity. I will never say no to anything again. And that sounds great, but let me tell you,
exhausting.
8 months into the year of doing that, yeah. I'm exhausted.
Well, and I think to be fair, it takes re-entry takes time. And I think the longer that you're in, the more you feel that, because there's 1,000 things going on in your head when you get out. People are looking at you, they think he's got to be so excited. And yes, it's all that, but you're also all these things, your friends and family, and I want to be the same person. I want to figure out how to fit in. I want to figure out what I'm going to do. Where am I going to work? All these things just are racing through your mind. And it takes a while for that to settle, because you've re-entered the world and the world moves so much faster than prison, and you have to adjust to that. And I think you've done a fantastic job of getting in and getting things. Very few people have been able to accomplish what you've accomplished in a short amount of time, what you've done. And I think that's also good for people to hear that are in that you can get yourself and steady yourself and also do things, but don't put too much pressure on yourself, because part of it is you're reinventing your world and also getting used to the world that has changed while you were in. So you have to give yourself a break.
One thing I'd say is, when I was inside, I always had an eye to the future in the sense I was thinking about options that I could create for myself or what my life would look like. But what my focus on a daily basis was living the most meaningful life there and that day.
Yeah.
Because it was so easy to watch guys get lost in the future, watch me get into some long distance relationship and start dreaming about one day maybe we'll be together. And all that did was just take energy from where I was and the stuff that I could actually be doing and accomplishing and send it into some, mythical realm in my mind that was just a waste of time. So even though I read those parenting books and those self-help books and those business books, I was focused on a daily basis with how could I better myself? How could I better the lives of people around me? How could I do something for my community inside? How could I make things better where I was? And that was what really allowed me to propel myself to the place I am now, where I could do the same thing out here. And I don't just have to think about that small space.
That's a big tip also. I think you have looking at something 3 years, 5 years in advance when you're in prison is overwhelming and suffocating. Winning the day, getting through the day, trying to make an impact on the day is big. And I think transferring that to the outside world is also big. I think that's also how we should probably be living our lives. How can I impact today? How do I win today? How do I make today the most and the best it can be? And I always say this to people who are asking me about these different things, is that there are bad days in prison and there are bad days out here. Go all the way down with it. Have yourself a horrible, very bad day, but come back up. You know, don't get stuck. Don't get on a slippery slope so you have a bad day, a week, a month, a year. I wanted to ask you though, Jesse, and I meant to ask you this while you were having bad days in prison. How did you work through that?
It depended. There were times where I didn't get out of bed, where I couldn't do it. I didn't know how to go on with it. And I it's funny because my now ex-girlfriend, Courtney, shared something with me that really I think is what I was doing, but without having a name for it. And she said it was constructive wallowing. And so I would have a bad day. I would block off a period of time and I would feel sorry for myself, or I would complain, or I would just pout. I would do whatever I had to do as intensely as I possibly could. And then the time was up and it was time to get on with life. And I found that it was really valuable to not just ignore that bad feeling and try to press on, because then it would just build and build and build. But it was also important not to give into it completely. So I would give myself time to constructively wallow and feel sorry for myself. And then I would go do something nice for somebody. I'd go, walk around the track or the weight pile, or I'd go do something at work, or I'd go write a letter. I'd go say thank you to somebody. What I found is the more I did something outside of myself, the more I got outside of those feelings that I was having, until I was back into kind of a balanced place where I could deal with whatever came up.
I like that. So after all this roller coaster life that you've been in, Jesse, where you're at now, knowing the people listening, what do you think's your greatest takeaway through all that you've been through?
There was somebody who came back into the prison to speak. They didn't let a lot of speakers come in, and I really was sad about that, because this guy came back in, and we'd all known him, and he was an upstanding guy. He worked in the school. He was always helping people. And he came back in and he said, the number one thing I want to tell you is that you're not irredeemable. Like, your life is not over. Whether you have a life sentence, whether you have 6 months left, whether you feel full of hope, whether you're strung out on dope, like, your life is not over. Like, it can start today. And I remember crying in that assembly. And I remember pretty much everybody in there crying, because he hit to the core of it. No matter how tough we were, what we thought, or how we thought about ourselves, that was the fear. Like, we thought our life was over. We thought we were irredeemable. And he hit that on the head. And he showed us how successful he was and what he was doing on the outside. And that let me believe that maybe one day I could do that. And now I'm at a point where I can share that with other people. I can go into the jail and say, hey, I will pick you up when you get out. I will get you a job. What can I do to help? I'm in a position to help because I now am thankfully blessed with enough, and I can share that with other people. And that is one of the best feelings I've ever had.
I like that a lot. That's really good. People getting a hold of you, Jesse, people wanting to know more about you, let us know. How does, as Jesse Crossen, how do you out there, these people listening, get a hold of you?
Sure. So you can see me on social media as Second Chancer or Jesse Crossen. For personal inquiries or speaking inquiries, you've got my website, jessecrossen.com, or for things related to the nonprofit, it's second-chancer.org. Reach out. Most of our things are focused locally right now because we just don't have the staff or the resources to expand beyond that. But our goal is to create a service and a model that we can expand nationally so that we can create opportunities and services for everybody, because everybody is equally deserving of a second chance.
Jesse, just keep doing what you're doing, man. And don't put too much pressure on yourself either, because you're doing a lot. For anybody who's out there, I mean, Jesse, you dropped a lot of nuggets of wisdom today. If you like what you heard, please go leave a review on Apple, Spotify. It puts the show on steroids. And I love all the back and forth we get from social media. You can find me at BrentCassidy.com anywhere on my website, but at Brent Cassidy on social media. So, and if anybody's looking for a book, check out Nightmare Success. That's my book. And I think probably Jesse's got a book ending that's probably going to be coming out. So be looking for that. As I used to say, and follow the show, by the way, it's easy to do. Just click on it. It's easy to follow. As I used to say when I was writing my stuff back and forth, communicating with the outside world, stay strong. I'll do the same. Jesse Crossen, you are an incredible guy, and I love what you're doing. Thanks for being on here today.
Thanks, sir.
Nightmare Success, in and out.